Hi AP Econ students, Mr. Mahler here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about elasticity. Now, elasticity is going to be broken up into two different videos, so this is part one on how decision makers react to changes in price. So how does demand change when the price of a good changes? Elasticity is all about finding out, will you make more money if you change the price of a good? Or will people buy less of that good with a price change? And this influences firms because it allows them to determine should they increase or decrease the price of a particular good. So, hope you're excited. I'm excited. Let's get started. Now, before we start, I do want to put in a caveat that elasticity was one of the most difficult things for me to wrap my head around when I studied economics at university. And even as I was prepping again for this class, the idea of elasticity was a little confusing for me. So hopefully I can use that confusion to help you by smoothing the road out with some of the difficulties I had. So let's first talk about what the technical term of elasticity is, which is just the responsiveness to a change in price or income by buyers and sellers. How does the change of usually the price of something alter how much people are willing to buy it? Or what is the change in the income of someone? How does that impact what they buy and how much of that item they will buy? And the reason why elasticity is important is that it allows economists to measure how much consumers and producers will change their behavior when prices or income changes. So that if you run a firm, a business, you can determine the best choice on how you want to alter the price of the goods or services that you're selling. But this also proves that sellers do not charge the highest prices because at some point, people are not going to buy it anymore. Now, the thing is, some things people will buy massively amount less, and some things people will still buy it at about the same rate because some things in life don't have substitutes. You need electricity, and for the most part, there's only one company you can buy electricity from. So if they raise the price, there are a few things you can do, but you're kind of stuck. Elasticity also allows economists to explain more fully how the economy operates due to price changes. So again, if you're owning a business, how much will changing the price impact how much people buy it? So, things that influence elasticity. First, the price of the good in regards to the budget of a person. So if you have an increased budget, you will buy more of certain goods and also less of other goods. We'll talk about that in a second. Also, if the price jumps. Substitutes, so if the price of a substitute good changes, that will influence elasticity. And time, because if the price of something goes up, people can't really make too many changes in the immediate term, but you'll see as time goes on, people will respond more and more. And let's actually talk about price elasticity of demand. So price elasticity of demand, and there's a way to calculate it. We're going to get into it in just a minute. But the term for this is just to measure the responsiveness of quantity demanded by people to a change in price. So how will a change in price affect the quantity demanded? If demand goes down, when the price goes down, the good is elastic, which means that people respond strongly to a change in price. And usually these things are luxuries because you're trying to find the best deal. If you're trying to find the best deal, that good is elastic because you have the opportunity to shop around for that particular price. But if demand does not go down when the price increases, that good is inelastic. They're usually necessities, things you have to have. You have to have electricity. You have to have water in your house. You have to have gas for your car, whether it's a hybrid or sometimes even, well, no, it wouldn't be electric because you need all of electric. Regardless, you need gas. You need bread. You need flour. There are some things you really can't skimp on. And one thing to know is that what is elastic and inelastic for one person is going to be different than another. And that's based on the income that person has. If I'm wealthy, I'm not going to care too much if the price of an apple goes up by 500 fils or 50 cents. Whereas if I don't really have a lot of money, some of those price changes can really impact my decision making as a buyer. Now, elasticity also is impacted based on time. We talked about that in an earlier slide. Time influences elasticity. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to give you an example. I'm about to date myself. Back in the year 2008, I was taking microeconomics, and gas prices in the United States at the time were over $4 for a gallon. It was absolutely ridiculous. It was actually approaching 5. And when that happened, look, I was a college student. I didn't have a lot of money. I had like a part-time job to make a little bit of extra money on the side, but I was living pretty much paycheck to paycheck. So in the immediate term, I didn't have a choice. I needed to get where I needed to get to. I needed to drive to my classes. I needed to do different things. And so in the immediate immediate run, I didn't change my behavior for something like gas. But in the short run, I could do some things to alleviate the price of gas on my budget. So I could try to save gas on a road trip. I learned how to, this sounds a little weird, like use your brakes sparingly so that you get more mileage out of your vehicle. But in the long run, what I could have done is say, hey, if the gas prices stay like this, I'm going to buy an electric vehicle because I have more time to adjust. I have time to save for this. Or I could get a hybrid. And what was really interesting in 2008 was that economists for a long time thought that gas, like for cars, was inelastic. It didn't matter what you charged, people would buy it at the same rate. And what they found was, no, when you get to about $4 a gallon, people actually start making decisions to use less gas. It was fascinating. My professor was just absolutely intrigued by that, finding out something new about a product. One other thing I want to mention is something called unitary elasticity. When something is neither elastic or inelastic, it doesn't really ever happen, but just note what it is and what number comes up out of it. It's a small little bit. Write it down because you may come up in the AP test where you end up having something that's unitary elastic. But again, one thing to note here is that slope does not equal elasticity. It's not about slope on a curve. It's about looking at the changes in prices. So let's actually talk about how we can determine elasticity. And there are two formulas that we're going to use for this. And again, very, very simple math. We're not getting into calculus here. This is pretty much Algebra 1. If we're looking at price elasticity of demand, which we just talked about what the definition was, again, would changing the price make me more money, right? And this is the formula. The change in the quantity demanded divided by the change in the price. And when you can determine that, that's how you determine the price elasticity of demand. But how do you know that? I'll talk about that in a second. Just know if you're just given the change in the quantity demanded and the change in the price, just divide those. That's how you get elasticity of demand. But in most cases, you're not going to get a problem where it's just, oh, here are those two things, plug it in. That's too simple. So what they're going to do is they're going to give you a situation like this where they say, here was the initial price for that good and the quantity demanded, and then they changed that price and the demand changed. So if you're looking for the price elasticity of demand, when you are comparing changes, you use a little bit more of a complicated formula. It is the same thing because it's the change in quantity demanded divided by the change in the price, but you have to use this particular formula. So you take the second quantity minus the first quantity divided by the second quantity plus the first quantity divided by 2. And then you do the same thing at the bottom. So I've already done a little bit of this math, and you can do this. This is simple math, simple algebra. Just make sure that you're using the brackets properly before you start dividing these two. What you do is you end up coming out with negative 0.6 is the number that you get. Now, this particular method is called the midpoint method, and now that I have negative 0.6, you're asking, well, what the heck does that mean, Mr. Muller? Okay, so what you do is you take that number, and based on the number you get, you can determine whether that good is inelastic or elastic. So, if the number you get is between -1 and 0, then that good is inelastic in some form or fashion. It could be slightly inelastic or very inelastic. Whereas if the number you get is -1.1 or -1.2 or keep going back down the line, then that good is elastic. So people are going to change their behavior quite radically when that price changes. So for this particular good, it would be relatively inelastic because it's between -1 and 0. So just make a note of that. That's really tough to get my head wrapped around for some reason. So you may need to watch this video again to go through that process. Just do it, take your time. The process is just understanding what is inelasticity versus elasticity and how is that calculated. So let's look at how elasticity looks like when you graph this. This is something that's perfectly inelastic. It does not matter how the price changes, you are still going to demand that one thing. A great example is a pet. Look, pets get old, pets get sick, pets have accidents. You gotta pay for your pet to live. The price of food for a pet could go up. The price of medical bills could go up. You're still having that pet. Because if you love that pet, if your dog gets hit by a car, your cat gets hit by a car, you're going to pay whatever you got to pay to save that animal's life. In most cases, unless you're a horrible human being, which I'm not going to judge you. If we're looking at something that's relatively inelastic, which means people don't change their behavior too much, a great example is electricity. Electricity prices can change somewhat, but people don't really have much of a recourse. You can't shop around for electric companies. In most cases, there is one electric company for the area that you live in, or cable TV if you're looking at an example like the United States. There are things where, you know what, you just have to buy it. You can change, and notice, you can change a few things. The quantity, as the price goes up, the demand could change slightly, but it's not going to be some drastic change because you don't have a lot of options. Now, if we're looking at something that's elastic, you're going to see that the slope is getting more horizontal. And this is something where the price changes and you could really alter your buying patterns because of that. A lot of things are things like fruit. And the reason why is, you know, the price of fruit goes up. Well, there's a lot of different fruits you can buy. So you don't have to buy those apples if the price goes up by 2 JD per kilo. I can start buying bananas, or I can start buying oranges, or I can start buying pears or peaches. There's a lot of options there. And so I can shop around and get the best bang for my buck. Now, if we're looking at something that is perfectly elastic, which means when the price changes, it perfectly matches, it's something like currency. And this is something, if you're trading currencies on the market, you're going to alter your buying patterns dramatically based on how the price of that goes. So here's a little bit of a summary for you and what the number will look like if you calculated the price elasticity of demand. So just pause the video. It's just a recap of what I said. Take a second. I'll wait. Okay, let's move on. So if we're looking at this as a graph, this is perfectly inelastic. This particular slope, demand 2, it's becoming inelastic. And then it's becoming more elastic. So perfectly inelastic, somewhat inelastic, becoming elastic. So as you see this line starting to become more horizontal, it's becoming more elastic. So I should probably do it the other way. When the line's becoming more horizontal, it's becoming elastic. So that's all there is for this part of elasticity. In the next video, we're going to talk about how supply and elasticity interact together. Hope you learned something you didn't know before. Thanks for watching.